Hey, it's Brian Terrell, CEO of GPL Technologies. I'm here with Nick Allevato. I've known Nick since college. Nick has worked with us, went about his career and worked at some other software development companies like the Fifth Kind. He's been around the block. He's built out probably 50 to 100 visual effects studios by now. The joke at GPL is that he's got the best credit with Piranha 3D. And that was really hard work. So I did appreciate that. So Nick has really began working on DevOps, cloud engineering, I don't know, over a decade ago. And he's recently achieved his the highest AWS certification with Solutions Architect. I'm very proud of Nick. I do appreciate Nick being with us. It's been back with the company for over 5 years. So it's what we call a boomerang. It's when somebody leaves, upskills and comes back, and it's always a pleasure. I think that as a business owner, that's probably the highest compliment. And so with that, I thought it would be fun to ask Nick some questions. So how are you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing really good. It's a beautiful day, and thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity for the boomerang. I think it benefits everybody in a way because I
Oh,
picked up a lot of skills, but um, yeah, I credit you with a start in the industry, really.
thank you. And when Nick arrived, we were building out Legend 3D. And I wish I had followed Nick's example. At 8 o'clock at night, Nick requests to go to the gym. And with my son and others, I would recommend they just stop working at 8 o'clock and go to the gym. Like there's really grind it out to midnight every day for a decade. I would never advise anybody to follow and do that. I
You
think it's
you were
fun.
nice with the request. And
But
in fairness, I did come back after the gym,
you
so
did,
we
and
we
I
continued.
would
So
never, but I would never do that again. I would have just had
yeah,
work stop at 8, go to the gym, all of us go to the gym, eat dinner, and then be back on site if we're in a hurry, 7 or 8 in the morning, and then do it all over. Because I think 12 hours is plenty of time for a work day. I don't think you really need to go to the 16-hour days of what a lot of people do their first decade out of college.
it's true. Yeah, the grind.
So I have a series of questions, and the only one that I think the most important is cost, because people love every aspect of the cloud. And the only concern that I have and many other people share is the variable cost and how to manage that through that. So you get the best aspects of the cloud and you are protecting yourself from the downside. And so we'll jump right into the hardest question, and then they'll get easier from here. And so what are some of the strategies that we deploy when we're building out um, cloud studios for our clients?
Sure. So you're definitely right that the cloud has a huge value proposition. But the backside of that value proposition is that it is metered. It's a metered service, and so there can be cost runs. Um, best practice on the AWS side is to expect those cost runs, but in that expectation of those cost runs, you also implement tooling that lets you see those cost runs in real time. So you have several tools on the AWS cloud, the Cost Explorer and budgets that let you set a budget or view and explore your costs in a horizontal way by service. Um, and yeah, you pair that with a good DevOps practice, such as everything is code, deploying things in an automated fashion, and have like power management and life cycle on resources, and put those together, and you will wind up with a positive experience because you're maintaining, building, and life cycling your resources efficiently. The budgets tool is probably the most powerful paired with the cost explorer while you're developing your budgets. Um, and you can set up auto reporting so you can see what those costs are daily, and you can detect early if you have a anomalous cost runs and deal with them. Budgets, AWS budgets can also stop services. It's a hard ceiling, so you can exceed certain costs, which is very important. The downside of that is your services will stop, but if that's the what you want to do, then that's one way to do it. Um, cloud is a very flexible tool, um, but it's also complicated. But we have practices that let us use that complexity to our advantage.
That's amazing. So just to reiterate, you have a cost explorer and a budgeting tool. And the budgeting tool, how accurate is it? And what kind of information do you need to feed in for that accuracy?
The budget tool is by the minute, just like all the other billing, at least on the AWS cloud. The billing is by the minute and the budget is by the minute. Um, you can set up a simple budget that is total. You can set up a budget that's complex, that's by service. And then you can set up actions when the budget's exceeded, like warn or stop. And so you can have a warning email go out to whoever and say you've exceeded your budget, or you can have it actually terminate or stop services that will prevent the budget from increasing further.
That's amazing. And so is it possible to send a warning and then have the next threshold as the cost
Yeah.
continues? To go ahead and
Yeah,
do it.
you have two thresholds.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
that
cool.
you can. Yeah. Yeah.
And then Cost Explorer, can you give a little bit more detail around what that is?
Yeah, the Cost Explorer is like a multi-dimensional graph. And by multi-dimensional, I don't mean 3, 4D, but um, you have your costs and you can break them up by day, week, month, the beautiful chart that you can pick time slices, and then you can filter, sort, and group by a bunch of AWS metrics, custom tags if you have them in place, service. You can drill down on your instance types. You can drill down on API calls for non-traditional infrastructure or Lambda functions or other things that aren't like a server. Um, and that tool is usually where I will start with an analysis because it'll give me every resource that's in the AWS environment, and then I can explore on a technical level from there. But it's essentially a graph tool with really powerful filters and groupings.
We should do a separate video, just focus on that with like a live demo. I think that would be amazing. Okay, that
Yeah,
sounds.
it's good.
Um, and then why was it necessary for us to write a cost estimation tool for our clients? Like what was the shortfall in the traditional AWS environment and their default tools?
So AWS is like a big giant API, right? And as a system administrator myself or a customer who is a sysadmin who's familiar with the platform, it's still a manual process for us to go and get those costs at a per job level. So, AWS doesn't know about our customers' jobs. That's a metadata thing, right? Um, the job doesn't exist in AWS per se. So we
And
have to tell AWS,
yeah, I understand what you're saying. So basically you have to be able to feed the render data through into AWS through the API, and then it can look at the future minutes and the resources. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, AWS is a general purpose IT infrastructure platform. There's no jobs entity, and I can say, hey, for this job, give me the resources that were used. The job is a customer level
So you need to
entity.
estimate the time to completion and then be able to put that into AWS, and then from there you would be able to get the costing.
Yeah, I can look. I get the actual render time,
Yeah.
and then I query AWS in reverse,
And then
so
are
to
you
speak.
able to estimate render time, or is it just best guess?
Um, we can estimate, and we have a very primitive estimation function actually in there. It's disabled. There's a lot of variables in an estimate in cloud. Um, time is an unknown until you have some sample data set. maybe the customer can input that manually and we can estimate from there. And then you also have a slightly variable cost on the spot instance, which is what render should be used with. And that cost can vary throughout the day by a measurable percentage, but we can get that cost. Um, really, the hard part of estimating cost is the render time because it's what we really can generate and what we do generate is this is what it could cost per hour.
That's fair.
And that's kind of as far as it goes.
And that's fair enough. I mean, it's basically our best educated guess. Because to know every
Yeah.
detail is a bit much because we won't have our arms around variables within the render and their complexity, such as particles versus just something that's more simple to render. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And so the state of that, how far are we towards having that completed to where the clients are satisfied? Are people satisfied now, or is there more work to do on it?
Yeah, there was we deployed it to a customer and they liked it. They had some report level bugs that need to be fixed. Not even bugs, names, really. Um, and the plugin's accurate, it's running, and they've actually used it. They reported this week that they've been using it and that it's to their standards.
That's amazing. That's like a happy father, right? Like, congratulations. I know you worked hard on this, and it's something that, I mean,
I did. Not
those who are
not
watching
9 months, but I work it was a few months of work for sure.
and,
Yeah.
I don't know everything that happens at GPL all the time. I only know vaguely, and it's good to catch up and hear that that's working. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Are
Yeah.
there any strategies that you deploy to try to help clients reduce costs that we might want to share with people to maybe help people watching save money?
Yeah. Uh, Definitely familiarize as an admin with the Cost Explorer, and understand what is driving your costs. Usually when somebody has a cloud cost problem, it's one or two services that are running inefficiently. And in cloud, that inefficiency can be an over provision service, like a huge server that somebody upgraded for testing but then didn't downgrade, or a fleet of servers that's running a service, but it's really not necessary, like the CPU usage is way below what the maximum could be. And so understanding what is your main cost drivers on a day-to-day basis lets you then massage those costs down over time. And so by the end of the month, 30 days with 20 of them being work days, that's a lot of time to do cost optimization and stop any cost bleeds that could be occurring.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. Um, Besides rendering, what else are we doing in terms of processes that we're running in the cloud? Are we working like any hybrid environments that are less obvious? Are we hosting critical services in the cloud where maybe they're rendering local or the storage is local? Or what are some of the interesting
Uh,
in cloud that are non-obvious?
yeah, I would say VDI, which might be obvious, virtual desktop, that's pretty popular. But then also transfer, pretty popular. Um, Transfer, there's a lot of flexibility. You can run a common solution like Aspera or Signiant. And those services, I think, are best run in cloud. Um, Reason being, they're a high bandwidth service. Um, AWS comes with 25 to 40 plus gigabit connections. You can have WAN connections up to 5 to 10 gig or more. They can be intense. We all know that transfers can take down WANs and firewalls, and that's a lot of packets and a lot of data. When you have multiple users doing it, they're competing, and you have a little bit more bandwidth, I would say, in the cloud.
That's a
Right?
brilliant idea to keep it outside of your environment so you can max out your throughput.
Yeah, and then you can have a backend connection that pulls the data or a sync service or a cache and you access the data on demand, and it'll pull it down when you need it, or you can pre-warm that cache and have it like transfer. There's also the AWS Data Sync service, which is part of transfer. So you can Signian or Aspera, or you can use FTP, SFTP managed in AWS as well. Write that data to S3 or FSX or EFS, which are managed file systems or object storage. And then you can sync that data from those locations as objects to your file system, like your Isilon, your on-premise Cumulo, whatever you have on. And that can be a triggered thing via an API call. It could be a scheduled thing every 30 minutes or every hour. It'll scan the metadata and walk whatever it needs to walk and transfer the data over a private connection or a public connection if you don't want to go that far. So transfer, I think, is a big one. And transfer can be part of other services. Transfer is part of any multi-site operations as well.
I think that's,
So yeah, and then VDI is probably more popular now than it was, I guess, what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, before the remote era was dawned upon us all. But that is another big one. And I like the cloud for VDI because it enables multi-region very easily. And easily is a bit of a, it's easy, but it's not easy. It's easy in the sense that you have points of presence all over the world. It's not easy in the fact that you do need to architect the network correctly on the AWS cloud side so everything can talk and it's efficient. So that lets you have good latency to all of your users in those regions. That's important for VDI. So
and like, let's
that's
say that you have to split, let's say you have operations in Australia, UK, and California, and it's all cloud. How is the data managed on the back end? And so that you can have your workstations be local to you for your VDI to be clean, but still access the same data set. Is the data copied into each location? And is that handled by AWS or is that handled by us?
so there's several, or there's a few cross-region data replication services. So it depends on, performance requirements and things, but generally you can have some high performance Lustre or NFS shares, and they can be either managed by AWS or self-managed on a Cumulo style in cloud high performance NAS. And you can replicate across backend links. So you are essentially using 100 gigabit plus connections between those regions. And you can use the vendor's replication like SyncIQ or Cumulo's multi-cluster, or you can use AWS data sync on your file systems directly, or you can proxy your data through the object store. So the real authority on what the data is would be the object store, and then the file systems sync back to that. So you kind of have a few ways to architect it. In a 3, I would probably do the object store. If you were just doing 2, you could just do a simple data sync between the two. But because you have the third site involved, I would probably have the object store be the source of truth, and then have the file systems emulate that data set, if you will.
And in the near future, Cumulo will have a global file system. And then it would make sense
Yeah,
using the cloud that you would have 3 clusters local and then have it use the global file system to sync.
I think the vendor solutions are, I would say, almost say the better for media and entertainment, because they know what the performance requirements are, and also the um, consistency requirement, which is, in any distributed system, you have CAP, you have consistency, availability, and partition. You can have 2 of them, but not 3. So that's what these vendor solutions are attempting to solve, and I think they've come a long way in the last decade, where you can have a multi-site setup with multi-cluster and data sync, and it will be consistent, meaning the data will be replicated globally within a few seconds or a few hundred milliseconds or a few tens or dozens of seconds or minutes, depending on the data size.
That's amazing. This is a really important question. How do we decide which clients are best for cloud versus on-prem versus hybrid?
Well, definitely size is part of that. Skill is part of that. Size being the size of the studio and the size of the IT team, and then skill being, I would say, the skill of the IT team. Cloud isn't something that can just be bolted on. It's not a set it and forget it. It's a constantly evolving entity, piece of infrastructure that requires maintenance, just like our on-premise servers require maintenance, whether it's cost, putting a new service up, migrating a service to cloud. These are changes that occur over time. And we have some customers that will use one or two services, and that's sort of it. It works for them. They're small. Then we have some customers that use the cloud heavily, and they want to add more things to it. We come in because we can help them get into the cloud and use the cloud and build it quickly with best practices. But the customer has to be willing to adopt that technology stack into their environment. If the customer isn't privy to using the cloud or doesn't understand the billing model or thinks the cloud can do something that it can't for them, then that's not a good fit. But if the customer understands how the cloud is architected and how the billing model works and the shared responsibility model of the resources that they use, then I think it's a good fit.
It's amazing.
Most customers are a good fit for it, put it that way.
I agree. I see a lot of customers that want a fixed cost. And it makes sense for on-prem because they want to know that they're going to pay for this equipment. They don't have to monitor the usage of their equipment. They can run it 24/7, and that is locked in. And then they can go to the cloud for scale if they need to.
Yeah,
And that's
a good fit. Yeah.
The way I look at it, it's like a religion, like Apple versus Windows versus Linux. And when they
Definitely is.
try to get the wrong Windows user on Linux would be a nightmare.
Any Windows user.
And
I say that as a Windows user.
to have
Yeah.
a Mac user try to use Windows. As a side note, every year or two, I have Daniel Extra, which is kind of like our quartermaster for those watching at home. And I have him prepare one of the new Dell XPS laptops or whatever Windows laptop is available at the office, and I'll use it for about an hour or two to see if it's something I want to use. And I'm always open. And I think next I need to try an Ubuntu laptop and see what happens. I'm always curious.
Always open, but always disappointed.
Yeah. Well, I was anti-Mac until I moved to Los Angeles. And once I was in Los Angeles, Macs are everywhere. Once the Mac Mini came out like 15 years ago, I switched.
Yeah. I remember you said, I like a Mac because I get a PDF and I can just open it.
Yeah.
It was in the old yellow office. I remember you said that. You were like, it gets included. It's like,
That's
I
right.
think he's right.
And a little bit drifting away, but yeah, I had a debate with our CTO Jason Bloom yesterday as to why Microsoft has to be the back office, and Jason's right. It's easy to use, easy to collaborate. It goes really fast. It always works, and it's very secure. And I can't say that I have an open source solution off the top of my head. Are you seeing
No,
anything in the open source community that would displace Microsoft Teams and the Windows?
nope.
Yeah.
There's they try. Um, one of my favorite programmers, don't want to go too far to tangent, but he basically doesn't think open source has much more time left.
Oh, because
No,
my favorite people who invest in software say that open source is at the beginning of a golden era. And the reason why
it's
it's
always, yeah.
oh no, it's true. Listen, they say that you can get 80% of the functionality for 10 to 20% of the cost of current software. And the reason why is because AI now with Copilot and the other tools are able to write code at such a rate now and be able to handle such large data sets that with AI coming on the scene with overseas developers, you're able to then recreate a lot of the great applications fast. And so they're under the impression that Zendesk can go away today, Slack can go away today with better tools.
I mean, I'm not an authority on the open source versus closed source, but you know, AWS Cloud is closed source, Microsoft is closed source, Oracle is closed source. A lot of the big guys they're all still closed source. What I find interesting is that, like for example, AWS started developing open source with Elastic, which is an open source product, but then they forked it and started building their own off of it. And now it's closed source on the AWS side. So they sort of like take the benefits of open source, but then monetize it. I'm a big fan of monetization. I think that when people do work, they should be compensated. I also understand and appreciate the nature of open source, which is sort of helping humanity in a way. I find it ironic. OpenAI is closed
Close.
source.
Yep.
It's open.
And they're
So
gonna close it
there's,
out. No, I
it's in,
agree with you.
you
I
know,
think you have two things. Like I do work for free because I find it interesting. Then I do the work I'm a professional at to get paid.
yeah, you find an interesting thing and you get into it, and I think that's what open source has that. I think open source came from maybe a different time, like a Wild West time of the internet, and when people were willing to contribute, and it's sort of the thousand monkeys with a typewriter gets you Shakespeare mentality. But there's something to be said now, like you said, with these AI tools and assistants, and not just AI, but our knowledge of technology and stacks and best practices for programming and creating software, that's developed also. So you kind of don't need huge teams to build cool pieces of software. So that almost pushes things more towards closed source because you don't need this broad team of thousands of people contributing a little bit. You really need your core development team and you can get a product out the door quickly as opposed to like, a big company back in IBM Big Blue days where you need a whole division, something like that. So
I agree. It's
I think
going,
we're
I
in yeah. What's that?
think it is going in that direction. Less people doing more. And now talking to my friends, it's a proof of concept over a weekend. And so
Right.
if you
Yeah.
want to, and what I was looking at is that there is the Zendesk replacement. There is other replacements that are open source, so you can grab them, fork them, do your own thing, and then contribute back into the pile.
Yeah, I think open sourcing to kind of bring it back to our industry, I think like you mentioned recently Proxmox, which I've been using Proxmox for a long time, and I was so happy to hear you mention it. If a studio is starting up and there's, two founders or three founders, one of them's an artist, one of them's technical, one of them's financial or something, open source solution in that case, I think is like where to go because it's going to keep the costs for the software basically zero and you're going to have a lot of functionality. Then as they grow, they move into a support license for Proxmox, maybe add two more Proxmox servers on some Dell hardware, which is like kind of closed source in its own way, the hardware. And now they have a cluster with VMs running their gear and they're paying a license fee. Well, now they're moving towards paid software. And once they get to 100 people, they're probably going to want to go to VMware or something like that. So there's sort of like there's a place for it, I feel. And I think that
I
just because
agree.
that place is in all places doesn't mean it's, invalid or anything.
No, I agree with you. I think that it's a matter of risk and cash flow and what the amount is.
Yep.
And the reason that GPL was in the day they didn't call it GNU, they called it general public licensing, but now it's GNU public licensing. I wanted to take open source software like Postfix and build out email servers and really beat out Microsoft Exchange, which crashed and lost data in its early days and was very annoying.
Hmm.
And to build these great little open source servers and not have to buy NetApp. But what I quickly learned is operational expense. And when it comes to
Yep.
operational expense, you got to question, if I cut out these paid for software, what is the expense of maintaining the open source software? And what's the risk to the business? And if it's okay to risk the business and it's okay to um, dedicate internal resources doing what would normally be done by a support team. And also, quite frankly, issues that would never happen because when you're running a NetApp storage system, you just don't have the issues with Samba or SMB and NFS that you were having back in the Samba days. And the expertise are just an email away to fix the problem, whereas they're paying a consultant $20,000 a month to maintain it. It's certainly no savings.
And I almost see a similar pattern with on-premise and cloud as well, is there's operational costs, frankly, on both. Some
Mhm.
argue operational costs are less for cloud because you're not maintaining the gear, but you are paying a metered cost for it. And you could rely on that service to be operational without any maintenance. Like you said, back in the day, maybe you had to build a server, put the disks in, install Linux or BSD, provision your RAID hardware controller, uh, Samba, install that, configure, share it, tune it, all that. Well, in cloud, you click like 5 buttons or 2 API calls and you have an NFS share. So,
That's,
which is better? Don't know. That's up for the customer to decide, but I have my opinions.
yeah.
You know,
And I think it depends on your workflow.
it does. It
You're
does depend.
4x7, 365, and you have petabytes of data. A lot of people argue once you get to that kind of size that it's better on-prem, but it
I think
depends.
so.
And when I
I
was
kind of agree.
interviewing a member of the AWS team, which that should be out, it came out this week. It's argued that hybrid's the best. You select what works best for the business. Cool. Well, Nick, thank
Yeah.
you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Um,
you.
is there any closing words that people should consider when they're working with AWS and GPL?
Um, you know, not specifically, just GPL is here to help. As Brian has said, that every business is different, every business's need is different. And AWS is very flexible and it can be whatever the customer needs it to be. It can be small, it can be large, it can be hybrid, it can be standalone. And I think that that's where our edge comes in is we don't prescribe. We prescribe things like best practices and doing things correctly, but the decision ultimately comes down to the customer and their unique situation.
Well, thank you, Nick. All right, well, hold the line. I'm going to do one more. So for the people editing, cut it out at the Nick's last words. I'm going to pause this recording and start again on a new one.